Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 132. We're going to talk about the perfect political candidate. Before we get to that, I just want to say I got a thumbs down on a previous video, and I don't even have a lot of listeners, so to get a thumbs down is kind of interesting to me. When I was teaching, and you get your course evaluations, or people, and I encourage people to go on to ratemyprofessors.com and write whatever it is that they wanted, because I know a lot of students check that out before they actually take a class. And I got mostly good reviews, like 93% were positive, which I thought was a pretty good, if we were going to compare it to a test score, that's an A. And when I got my evaluation from the person who did not support my contract not being renewed, I thought, you know, she was reading my evaluations, and I said, well, I thought everyone gets positive reviews like that. And she pretty much told me that no, that doesn't happen all that often. But I appreciate the thumbs down. You always get them. I just wish they let me know what dissatisfied them so much. And I would do that in class, and we get to talk about it. And I was able to convince a lot of people that no, what they thought was a negative is actually a good thing. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. What is a perfect political candidate? Do you go by appearance? Is it that the person says all of the things that you want? Well, if that's the case, where the person is saying everything that you ever wanted a political candidate to say, well, that perfect candidate is you, right? Because no one is ever going to say everything in exactly the way that you want them to. But if it's not you, right, you're waiting for a perfect candidate. Well, it's sort of like waiting to find a consensus among voters. Uh, there is none, because everyone has their own belief. Everyone you ask has a different idea of who or what is important, what must be done, what is the most important thing that needs to be done. And this is because of subjectivity. Now, this is the Subjective Professor channel. And so everything is subjective. Everyone has their own opinion, and there is never a consensus, ever. Okay. It just doesn't happen. Uh, if you take a single topic, any topic really, race, for example, no one ever agrees on what it is and what must be done, unless you have a definition which covers all possible interpretations, like the one that I offer, as shared in previous episodes. But then what do you do after that? Right? If you have an honest discussion, any um, action that is taken to do something about race has negative blowback on other people. And if they're in the same room with you, can you really say, but we're going to do it anyway? Can you look at the person in their face and says, I don't care about you, and we're going to do this anyway? Well, maybe you will, but the rest of the class probably will not go along with it. And so really what we're talking about, uh, is that you can't get a consensus. And this is why so many people are emphasizing democracy, which is what I talked about not too long ago, tyranny of the majority, right? You try to get everyone on board through one issue, and then you can create some sort of majority and then force all those other people to abide by what you have determined is the most important thing that needs to be done. And this brings us to the single issue voter, right? So because of this inability to come up with some kind of consensus, people resign themselves to a single issue. They basically decide what they believe is the most important issue for them. Like one of my colleagues, his single issue was war. He was anti-war. He doesn't care who's in the war, who's fighting the war, doesn't matter. He's anti-war. And that was his issue. And so whoever was more anti-war, that was the person he was going to vote for. Nothing else mattered. Okay. And so there are a lot of people like that. And so because you can't find a consensus. You can never find the perfect candidate, but you feel like you got to vote. And so you're going to vote based on a single issue. So then a lot of people know that this phenomena exists. And so what a lot of candidates do, knowing this, is they cater to each group, right? So whatever the issue is that is on the minds of a lot of people, which these days is not very difficult to figure out because the mass media is constantly pumping certain kinds of propaganda, the educational system, elementary, high school, college, they're all pumping out the same propaganda. It is pretty easy to be able to touch on certain major issues, which a lot of people have come to agree this is a serious problem and the solution is obvious. A politician has to solve it for us, right? And that this is just the kind of mentality which then allows candidates to cater to voting blocks, right, which are based on and built around a single issue, right? And so if we examine the single issue voter, well, as I said before, that single issue is what that person has determined is the most important issue for that person. But for who else, right? And quite when I say, is it really important to that other person? Are they just basically imagining that it would be important for them if it got to them, if they were in that situation? Or are they really confronted with that choice and that decision? In other words, how relevant is it to that person's life? And give you an example, abortion, I think, is a big issue that's um, part of the political debate this time around because of the whole Roe v. Wade thing. Now, abortion or pro-life, pro-choice, however you want to say it, I get it. I'm a Jesus freak pastor, and so it's kind of obvious what my position probably is. But because my position is based on my own personal belief, what I do is I tell everyone around me, my church members, my children, right, that they should never, ever, ever have to be put in a situation where that's even an issue, right? So you do everything to make sure you are never in a position where should I get an abortion is ever a question that leaves your mouth, right? That shouldn't be an issue. Well, they're guys. I have 4 sons, and so obviously it wouldn't leave their mouth. But if they got someone pregnant, for example, and so I can't imagine someone, and this is a long time ago, a person who is in that kind of situation where it is a big deal. Yeah, I can't imagine. I don't want to ever be in that situation. If I could somehow prevent someone from ever having to be in that situation, I would do everything I could so that the person never had to make that choice. But see, here's the thing though, like because it's not an issue that I am going to face, then it's none of my business, right? So the people I care about, the people who I'm in touch with, oh yeah, I'll try to help that person, prepare that person, whatever, so they never have to make that choice. Um, my wife, when she got pregnant with our fourth child, she was a little on the old side. And so all the doctors basically just right away said, oh, you have to get an abortion because it's too dangerous for you. And so our choice was, no, we're not going to abort this child. And, he's an awesome kid. So, that was 12 years ago. So he's an awesome kid. We have no regrets. We're completely happy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, the word abortion never even really came up, only because the doctors kept saying it, that we even had to discuss it. But see, this whole phenomena, like why do doctors push it? All this is because of the regulations that are in place, right? So if there's a complication during the pregnancy, the risk of lawsuits for the doctors go through the roof. And so they always try to err on the side of caution. and basically encourage what is the least lawsuit likely course of action. But if the government never got into the debate in the first place, right, they left it to the states or they left it to the person making the choice, all of the expenses, everything that happens after, all of that was a personal responsibility, then we would have a completely different society today, right? Most people would not even really be discussing abortion. So if we reduce the government, got the government out of making any of our choices, then I think the issue, the way the discussion would be much, much different. It certainly wouldn't be part of a politician's platform. So basically, you have phenomena like this, where it is made into an issue to get you to agree to this candidate whose positions on all of the other issues, and there are many, right? You have no idea what that position is, right? Because it's only the one issue. And so this is why you get a lot of people who also say things like, I held my nose and voted, right? I voted for that person, but I had to hold my nose. Because you don't, if you just look at some of the other things that that person has done, their track record, their personal record, you don't like it. But hey, but they're going to go along with me with this one issue, right? This is not a very good system. Candidates cater to these single issue voters, and so therefore candidates are busy, it's like the guy who's trying to spin dishes, and up, if it's only two dishes, then he can keep them both spinning for quite a long time. But if he's got 30 dishes, well, he's running back and forth trying to make sure all of the dishes are spinning. And to put it in people terms, to make sure everyone is happy, right? Just making sure everyone just got enough to keep them happy. This can explain why flip-flopping is such a big phenomena, so frequent when it comes to politics. Why do people flip-flop? They promised me this, oh, they're going back on their promise. Because a bigger dish, a more important dish is about to fall, and they have to go there, which means you are going to be cut loose, right? You're going to be left hanging. Someone did a cost benefit analysis and they said, okay, who are the weakest supporters? Who has the fewest votes? Who are the poorest people? Yeah, we're going to have to leave them behind. And they're hung out to dry, right? Because someone did a cost benefit analysis. Now, we have this phenomenon now where people are so socialized and conditioned to think that certain issues are more important than everything else. And so we can ignore everything else by focusing on this single issue to get our candidate in that office. This is why agree to disagree doesn't work anymore. I mean, people use it, they still say it out of politeness and just to end an argument that looks like it's going to escalate. So we say agree to disagree, but it's not agree to disagree, because you then go to the voting booth and you say, I'll show you who's, agree to disagree. And then when your person wins the election, you basically in your head, I don't think most people would actually say it out loud, but it's like, haha, taste that, So it's just kind of a interesting thing where agree to disagree really is meaningless, because people then try to figure out a way to force the other person to bend to their will. There's too much at stake now with these elections, which is why I said in one of my podcast episodes last week, that the government is too big. That's why people have to care about, these idiotic debates and candidates who really don't know that much and who are in charge of so much of our lives. So what would be the solution? The solution is to talk in terms of principles, right? If you say, look, my principle, if you elect me, I will not support anything which uses force. Everything has to be voluntary. I know it doesn't work in a national election because there's no education behind it, but this is how I began all of my classes. I would say, look, you want to stay in this class? We're going to say some crazy things, but I'm going to ask you to follow two rules: no coercion and no hypocrisy. right? No one can force anyone to do anything. You can't use force, and legislation is force, and you can't have hypocrisy. If you say something is good to do, then everyone is allowed to do it. If you say something is bad, it can't be done by anyone. And you can't just change perspective, or you can't change the word you're using to make it seem like it's okay, right? So racism is, can be prettied up by calling it affirmative action. You can talk about abiding by the rules of equality. Well, that's racism, right? But by a different standard. And so giving something a new name and pretending that it's something different, that it is not discrimination, it is not judging people, by certain criteria, which you have essentially said is not allowed, right? So if you can't discriminate against colored people, then you can't also hire them on the basis of their color, right? See, it works both ways. And so if you say something like that and say, this is the principle, right? Which means that we have maximum freedom, which also means that there are consequences, there are repercussions for all the choices that you make. And so if that is your platform, right, then it's not, you don't have, you are not catering to people. People are hearing your message and coming to you. It's flip-flopped, right? And so and I believe at one point in time, this used to be the way things were, but you represent your position, and then people say, oh, okay, I'm going to vote for this person, right? And especially if there is no Federal Reserve, they can't print out all this money, and it's a little more complicated, but whatever, simplify it. They can't print out all this money to pay for all the things that they promised you. Okay, if you don't have that kind of situation, then it's back to the voters looking at the candidates and saying which principle works best, not just for me, but also for my neighbor, and so that my neighbor won't come after me once this person is elected, right? And so when you have this kind of phenomena where candidates go back to principles, right? So imagine if you had a candidate that said, well, if you elect me, I'll ensure that all of the elites who are in power now will stay elite, or all the bankers. My principle is that I support the bankers all the time, no matter what they do. And so they will always get a bailout. I mean, if you had your principles marked across your forehead, because people used to say everyone should wear a jacket to show who their donors are. Okay. Uh, that actually is a misdirect. I mean, who cares who donates to this person, you know, uh, in a free world, right? They're backing a horse, right? In fact, what you might begin to see is that, very large, wealthy corporations support all the candidates that are in the race. And so it doesn't matter who wins. But if you if you think about it well enough, it doesn't matter who donates to a campaign. What matters is the principle that candidate is advocating. I mean, if a candidate was like Ron Paul and said, "Hey, it's all about freedom," and the Fed, reduce the size of government, and you had corporations supporting that candidate, right? Why would that be a bad thing? You see, because it does mean increased competition with other businesses. So this is the only solution. It's a much more difficult solution, but this is the way I think most people who lean towards the liberty, who are pro-liberty, reduce the size of government, this kind of person would gravitate to this. This is why Ron Paul was so popular when he was. He didn't cater to any certain demographic group. He just explained his principle. This is why knowing history is important, why certain governmental policies are bad, and what is the ultimate result of certain policies. Critical thinking is extremely important, right? And once you have those tools to be able to analyze what a person is saying, which includes looking at everything else that person is doing, well, most of these candidates would never be able to get out of the starting blocks, right? And this is what Ron Paul did so well, right? He was open with everyone about his faith, about the way he lived his life, but his beliefs did not affect how he represented his hometown, right? And so it was always going to be the same principle. And so when you have a candidate who lives, acts, and does his job in Washington according to a principle, there's no flip-flopping, right? There's no flip-flopping. There's no betrayal, right? There's no surprise. You know what this person is going to do. And most people would be happy, all right? They would be happier this way. But of course, given the corrupt state of our government now, anyone who tries to do that, the political voting machine itself squashes you, right? Because if you get what you want, then a lot of the people who are all the bureaucrats lose their job. They can't have that. And so a candidate like that is very difficult to even hear about and very difficult for that person to win, which is why, I'm in the camp where a lot of other people will say the only hope for the United States is a complete economic collapse. Unless someone else can figure out a way, make a run for president and bring education back into these campaigns. But that's it for today. Hope you were able to benefit by it, and I will talk to you again soon.